Hi everyone, ThaKinetic here. Welcome to my Galio guide for season 11, and we're going to cover itemization, how I think that Galio's itemization is going to be for the upcoming preseason and probably also season 11. Yeah, there are timestamps in the description, so feel free to skip ahead. Also, keep in mind that while I made this video, I used the data from the PBE, the numbers and cost of the items, and that can have changed since, and it can still change in the future and also in preseason. So just remember that some of the tier placements might change if the price, for example, decreases or increases. I'll try to keep you guys updated in the comment section if there are any major changes to this list. But I thought it would be nice to do this now that Worlds is over and also we're really close to preseason. So you guys kind of get a look of it ahead of time. Yeah, so I've been testing a few items over there. I've been looking at the stats, looking at the numbers, and I've kind of come up with some rankings for these items and also some builds I think will be really good. Yeah, so I hope you guys are excited because I am. Before we start, however, I want to have a moment of silence for our fallen comrade. You were such a good item, man. I'll never forget you. I'm sorry, guys. It's just too much. So, now with that in the past, we can look at the new starter items. And by new, I don't actually mean new, but I mean that these items have been changed somewhat. For Doran's Ring, it's not that much. I believe it's just gotten 10 extra HP, but it now reads that we get the 15 AP, 70 health, and some additional physical damage, like before, but also when you kill a minion, you get 6 mana. If you can't gain mana, you restore 3 health instead. Really solid item. Just seems like a straight buff from this season, and so should be a pretty viable star item. Right. And actually, I will disagree with you because there is a new star item on the block, and it is coming in very strong. So the other star item for Galio this season, this upcoming season, is going to be Dark Seal. Dark Seal not only gives you HP, only 30 less, but it also gives 5 more AP than Thorn String. And on top of this, and wouldn't you know, you get the Glory passive, but instead of getting 2 AP per Glory, you get 5. It's like a Magi's. It's like a Magi's Soul Stealer, which is 10 maximum stacks. Now, this item is absolutely crazy. This item is so fucking good. And if you're in a lane where you suspect that you're going to be winning, and of course, I mean, you're always going to be suspect that you can win the lane, even just by the off chance that you get the 1 or 2 or 3 kills, this item becomes so fucking powerful. It's actually insane. And I have to think that they must change these numbers. Maybe it's a bug, maybe something, but if this isn't changed and it goes to live like this, I'm quite likely going to be starting this item every single game. It's just too good to pass up on. Your snowballing is so good. It gives you such a nice boost of AP by just, I mean, imagine having 70 AP from an item that costs you 350 gold. Very, very powerful. So because of this, I've sort of said for starter items, I will prioritize Dark Seal over Dawn's Ring, but maybe if Dark Seal gets changed or Dawn's Ring kind of um, also gets a buff or something, so that maybe Dawn's Ring works better in matchups where you have to survive and Dark Seal in the other matchup. But as it looks right now, Dark Seal is just way better as a starting item. Now let's look at the boots. And for the boots, nothing's really changed. It's the same items. And so we're just gonna use the same idea that we did in this season, and so we want sorcery shoes. You can't tell it's sorcery shoes from the icon, but it is sorcery shoes. If you need some kind of extra burst damage, generally speaking, if you're against a lot of heavy AD, you want to go for Ninja Tabi, which has again a new icon, and you will want to go for Merc Threats if you're up against CC. Now, I think generally most of the time you're going to be up against some form of CC, and the MR is not wasted on Galio as an offensive stat. And so I think that Merc Threats, especially if you're running Aftershock, is still better. But of course, if the enemy team doesn't have any notable CC and no notable AD champions, you can go for Stork's Shoes as well. Now, moving on from boots, we're going to be looking at components. And I'm actually adding a tier list down here because now we're really getting into like ranking the items in how good I think they are on Galio for the upcoming season. And the reason I do components here is because we actually get some really interesting new component items in the game, and I wanted you guys to see them because a lot of people don't even realize they exist. Um, and I want you guys to understand just how powerful these items can be on Galio. So first, we're going to start with the bottom F tier. I'm just mentioning this because it's one of these new component items. Basically, it's called Leeching Leer. It gives you 20 AP, 150 health, and 10% Omnivamp for 1300 gold. Um, it is not very good at Galio, obviously. The stats are not good enough for the items, and you don't make very good use of the Omnivamp. And also, it builds into an item that you just don't use, so it's kind of a bait item. If you are having a tough time in lane, you don't need to buy Omnivamp to sustain yourself. You need to get MR or armor or just a few potions or so on. This item is not worth it. Moving on, we're going to look at the next item, and it's going to be an A tier. It's called Blighting Jewel. Blinding Jewel is 1250 gold, 25 AP, and 15% magic pin. And this item is actually really good. It's not really an early game item, but as a transition item into Void Staff, it's actually quite good. It's the same price as a Needless, but if the enemy team has a lot of MR and you already have one or two AP items, I think this item is actually really efficient and also builds really neatly into Void Staff, which is a great item. So definitely a good item to keep in mind. Next up, we have Oblivion Orb in the A tier, and it's for the same reason. Oblivion Orb is basically the AP execution is calling, and it's amazing. The stats are pretty decent. I would say it's actually pretty efficient, and it gives you Grievous Wounds. Just a really good item to just buy early on and just hold on to if you're up against a lot of healing. I'm really glad they added this actually. So yeah, great item, very situational. Then we have in the S tier, we have Seeker's Arm Guard, and Seeker's Arm Guard looks pretty much the same, but there's a big significant change here, and that is Seeker's Arm Guard now costs 900 gold. 900 gold instead of 1100 is incredibly strong, and it still gives 30 AP, and you're able to stack it up to 45 armor. And instead of stacking it with half an armor point per minion kill, you're going to be stacking it twice as fast with one armor per minion kill. And of course also champion kills and so on. And this means that for 900 gold, you're gonna get 45 armor and 30 AP. This is basically a chain vest with 30 AP on top. That is very, very good. Very, very, very cost efficient. So if you're up against an AD lane, that's a bit tough. If the enemy team has a lot of AD champs, buying this item early basically guarantees that you're going to be really, really tanky and hard to deal with for the entire game. And of course, it builds straight into Sonya's Hourglass, which is also a great item against heavy AD teams and in a lot of situations. So generally speaking, Seeker's Arm Guard is straight S tier. And finally, we have Verdant Barrier. Now, since making this video, I've actually changed my mind about this item. I think it's an A tier item, and I'll explain it in a bit. But first, it's Verdant Barrier, 1200 gold, 25 AP, 25 MR, and it stacks over time up to 15 extra MR, which is quicker the more damage you take from your enemy. And so I think it's a good item for sort of surviving heavy AP lanes and moving into a Banshees. It's a really, really good transition item into Banshees. The reason why I don't think this is S tier, even though I originally put it there, is because the cost is too steep compared to the 900 gold for Seeker's Arm Guard. If this item cost 900 gold, it would definitely be an insta buy for me pretty much every game. But I think that there's a reason they can't do this, and that's because we're gonna end up with kind of the same situation that we did with Abyssal Scepter back in the day, where both mages fighting each other were forced to rush that item because if they didn't, the other person would simply tank all their damage and just beat them straight up. And I think that having AP and MR on a cheap item can be dangerous. That said, I think that because it's 1200 gold, if you're versus a hard AP lane, it might even just be better to rush Merc Treads because you want mobility anyways. And if you rush Merc Treads, then it's kind of you're really gonna delay your build if you then spend 1200 gold on another MR item um, before moving on to core items, unless you want to rush Banshees, but I don't think that's doable in every game. I still think this item is a great item. Maybe you can buy it after your first item. So like if you're up against a pretty heavy magic damage team, you want to do something like uh, your first item, your Merc Treads, and then you want to move into Verdant Barrier, and then you can sit on this for a while until you feel like you need Banshee. I still think it's a great item. It's A tier, but it's not S tier unless the cost goes down. So keep that in mind. If this item releases with like a cost of 1,000 or something like that, it's definitely a great item and it belongs in S tier. But if not, then I think it's an A tier item and I think it should be bought situationally if you really struggle against magic damage, whereas Seeker's Arm Guard can pretty much be bought every single time you're versing an AD champion in lane. Now, moving on, we're going to look at the new mythic items, and we're actually going to start right off the bat with Leandry's Anguish in the F tier. Really no surprise here. This item is complete bait item. Um, I know some people want to try and do the burn, the other burn item in Leandris, but this item is horrendous on Galio. It costs too much. It gives you 600 mana for no reason. The burn. If you want to use this item, just play Malzahar Brand or something. They will abuse this item so hard, and it's going to be absolutely horrifying to play against. But Galio, no, it's a bait item. Moving on, we have Riftmaker. Looks kind of interesting on paper. Gives you AP, HP, some ability haste, and of course the Omnivamp um, as well as the Conqueror-like passive. But again, you don't really use the Omnivamp, and the passive is not that good because you don't want to be staying in the fight for too long. You want to go in and kind of blow your load, so to speak, and then run away. And it also gives you percent magic pen on other items, and you don't really need this. I don't think there are many situations where Void Staff is not going to be enough for you. Um, I don't know, maybe you could do something crazy where you just stack percent magic pen, but I think if you're up against a team like that that only stacks MR and MR and MR, your team has drafted the wrong team. Very much so, and that will happen very rarely. So I just think this item is it's not very good. Don't buy it. It's a complete bait. Moving on to D tier, we have Shirelia's Battle Song, and this mythic might surprise some of you because it's actually not an AP mythic. It's actually support mythic. But I wanted to mention it because it's very interesting. First of all, it gives you really good stats. It gives you a lot of HP, some ability haste, gives you movement speed. It's very cheap. And the active is basically Spellbinder, and then you get an additional flat magic damage on your next 3 attacks. So it actually gives you quite a lot of damage, quite a lot of movement speed, some health. Gives all your other items more movement speed. It actually makes you kind of mobile on the map. I think this will be the best mythic for support Galio. I do not think it will be viable for mid Galio, but I wanted to mention it here. Yeah, if this was a support Galio guide, it would be S tier, but it's not, so it's D tier. I can't really think of when I would use it, but I would use it more than I would use Leandris, and that's why it's in D tier. Moving on, we're going to look at Luden's Tempest in B tier, and on paper, this is a pretty good item. It's actually lots of AP, lots of magic pen. Sure, there's some mana here, but it also gets some ability haste, a good active or passive that gives you wave clear, gives you burst damage, and also gives you quite a bit of movement speed for 2 seconds with low cooldown. So on paper, looks really good. The problem with Luden's Echo or Luden's Tempest is it's just outclassed by some of the other mythics that are available for Galio, and so There's never going to be a point where you're going to think this item is the best, but it's definitely not a bad item. It's just outclassed, and that's why it sits comfortably in B tier. Moving on, we're going to look at the first A tier mythic, and that's going to be Night Harvester. And Night Harvester is very interesting. It gives you AP, HP, some ability haste, and it gives you a passive that adds some damage to your abilities once per enemy champion per 60 seconds. So in team fights, you can hit all five, you can get all the damage off, and you also get some movement speed, which kind of increases in duration the more people you hit. And the mythic passive is that it gives all legendary items 5 ability haste. So this one is definitely geared towards ability haste. This is why I think this is not the best item. I think it's still great, and I think if you pair it with a lot of ability haste, you can actually reach some really sick cooldown numbers. And I'm gonna get to that in the build section. But the reason Night Harvester is not S tier is because it is still like Luden's Echo. It's outclassed by other mythic items. But it's definitely viable in some situations and in one particular build, in my opinion. And we're going to discuss that later. But for now, we're going to move on to the S tier mythics. And the first one is obviously Hextech Rocket Bell. So this is the updated proto build, and it gives you AP, health, some ability haste, and the active, which we all know. It's been changed quite a bit though. Now you get max damage no matter if you hit one missile or five missiles. And in addition, you also get 75% movement speed towards enemy champions for 2 seconds. Now, read that thing again and tell me that is not absolutely busted. What they've basically done is they've said, okay, we're gonna bump up the price with 700 gold for Hextech Proto Belts. We're gonna give it more AP, give it a bit more cooldown. Uh, we're gonna reduce the health a little bit, but then we're gonna make the active much more reliable to get the damage off in team fights, and we're gonna give it the Spellbinder passive on steroids. It's absolutely insane how good this item is on Galio. You basically get this item and you have both Hextech Rocket Belt and Spellbinder in one item, plus it gives you Magic Pen for each subsequent item you get, so you actually get like more and more damage onto squishies as the game progresses. It's actually a really powerful item. Uh, Now you can't really wave clear with it anymore, that's my only gripe, but Galio doesn't really need that wave clear as much, and so it's not that big of a nerf. Yeah, this mythic is just completely insane on Galio. You should buy it almost every game. But there are some situations where I think there's another option, and that is, of course, Everfrost. Now, Everfrost is. It's not because this item is particularly good on Galio, it's more that Everfrost is a completely nuts item on a lot of champion. It's just a really great item on its own. It basically gives you a hard CC. It also gives HP, which is something the other mana AP items don't do. It gives you a little bit of ability haste, and then it gives you this active, which is actually really powerful because you can E someone, and while they're knocked up, you can use this and get a guaranteed root, which eliminates the need for kind of movement speed items in a way. It's a bit less reliable, but I think versus high mobility teams, this active is completely nuts. Like it's really really good and it's low cooldown. And on top of this, other legendary items get 15 ability power. This means your late game you're gonna have so much more AP compared to Proto build, for example, and that can actually turn out to be really, really huge in the long run. So I think definitely this item is viable, but it depends on the situation because Protobelt and the active from Protobelt is just so good in so many situations. It's only in a situation where, for example, they have people who dash over walls and it's better to root them instead of running after them, or maybe situations where they have some kind of I don't know movement ability or anything like that, like an Ezreal or so on when the Everfrost might be good. And also, I think really good if you're like in the skirmish and you're versus like high movement speed, like Lilia, Hecarim, someone with a Yumi, etc. Pinning them down for your team to kill for like an extended duration of time. You get like 1.5 seconds of extra hot CC. That's pretty good. Um, yes, and that's it for the mythics. Now, moving on from the mythics, we're going to look at the full items. And we're going to just start from the bottom and fill in the gaps here. So we're going to start with the F tier Nash's Tooth. It got 20 extra AP but had the cooldown reduction removed. I think it's weaker across the board for most champions, and the only reason I would ever buy this was if I have TP for some reason and I teleport to backdoor tower, and it might be viable, kind of. But yeah, this item is, even if it's changed, it's still not good in Galio. The attack speed is wasted, and yeah, buy something else. Next, we have Riley's Crystal Scepter. Again, I think on paper it's not that bad, right? It got the slow bumped up to 30% instead of 20, and the cost then went up to 3,000. The stats are pretty good, but you don't really make much use of the passive, and there are better items to fill your slots, item slots with. And so I just think this item is, you know, it's just not very good. I mean, slow on Q, sure, but not very good. It's only 1 second anyways. Moving on, we have Chemtech Putrefy. Chemtech, what? Chemtech Putrifier. Okay, and it's basically a cheaper version of Morello with worse stats. And the thing about this is that when you have the Oblivion Orb, you don't need to upgrade it before the very last item. And upgrading it into a worse version of Morellonomicon just seems nonsensical. So yeah, we're not gonna do that, and this item is never purchased. Moving on, we're going to go into D tier, and in D tier we have Demonic Embrace, and I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh wait, hold up, Kinetic. This item is really good on Galio, and it's not. It's the same reason as Leandris. It's a complete bait item. The stats are fine, but you're not gonna use the burn damage very much. The armor and magic resist is kind of net. It's net. You know what I mean. Negligible. And also, it's like there are so many better items with better passives and actives that you can use over this item. Like the only reason I would ever consider buying this item is if I'm doing some kind of meme tank build where I need some form of damage. And I would get this as sort of my damage item because it's kind of, it doesn't really depend on your AP so much. So I don't know, maybe on support, but again, I still think it's kind of a bait item. It's just not that good. Don't buy this item. Next item in the list is Gargoyle Stoneplate. And generally speaking, you don't want to buy too many tank items. I have outlined this in my previous itemization guide, but if you're gonna buy a tank item for some reason, this is probably the best one. Instead of the stupid active it had before, it now gives you a shield, which is nice. It gives you armor, magic resist, and the passive portion is actually decent. So yeah, it's probably the best tank item if you're gonna go for tank items. But yeah, you're not gonna do it. And Frozen Heart, they removed 30 armor and didn't adjust the cost, which is kind of whack. But they gave it this kind of passive where it reduces some stuff. And to be honest, it's just not worth it. The only reason it's not F tier is because maybe maybe this is better on, like, just as good as the old Frozen Heart on paper. I just don't think it is. I haven't run the math, so I'm kind of reluctant to put it in F tier because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's kind of the same power level, and maybe you just need to invest more in HP items. But it's not really worth making your build around the Frozen Heart. But maybe it's a very, very, very situational last item purchase against heavy AD teams. But yeah, it's not very good. Please don't buy this item unless you really know what you're doing. Um, Now we're moving on to B tier. Wait, did I skip? I skipped C tier. Oh well, whatever. We're moving on to Morellonomicon here, and uh, we have 70 AP, 250 health, and the improved Grievous Wounds. It's okay. The reason it's B tier is just because most of the time you don't want to upgrade this unless it's absolutely necessary. The 20% extra Grievous Wounds can be necessary sometimes, but stat-wise it is it's not the best item, and there are other much better items you can get if you're just sitting on Oblivion Orb. It's not a bad item. It's just not good, not the best. It's not optimal. But of course, you can finish this as your last item if you have Oblivion Orb, or if you really, really need a lot of Grievous Wounds, you can of course complete it, but those games are rare and far between. And moving on, we're gonna look at Abyssal Mask, and I think this is like the best tank item. I would maybe consider buying this against heavy AP teams because the MR is actually kind of utilized, and the immobilizing a champ is actually really good because now it's not they don't take increased magic damage, which was the old passive. Now it's just increased damage, and this means that your entire team can sort of make uh, do increased damage. So let's say you taunt 4 people, and then all 4 of them take 10% increased damage for 4 seconds. That's gonna make you kind of a menace in team fights. So I would consider buying this maybe sometimes if I need a huge boost of MR. Yeah, I actually like a tank item. Would you know? That's very rare on this channel. Anyways, we're gonna move on to the A tier items. This is where I think it gets really interesting. So first one is Cosmic Drive, and Cosmic Drive gives you 60 AP, 200 HP, 30 ability haste, and this spell dance passive. And if you look at the stats only, it costs quite a lot compared to how much you get. It's more CDR or ability haste focused, but the spell dance passive is actually pretty decent. And I believe on PBE before it had like 10% plus 10 ability haste, which was absolutely nuts on some champions like Singed and so on. And so they changed it to flat ability haste instead. I might be wrong, but basically right now it's kind of okay. The reason you would get this is just because you're gonna go a ability haste build with what's the what's the name, Night Harvester? Yeah. Because this gives 30 flat ability haste, or flat, everything's flat, but gives 30 ability haste, which is actually huge. And the passive is very good. It's always active. It's not, I mean, I think it needs kind of a numbers buff, but that might make it broken on Singed and other like AP skirmishers. And so you really buy it for the ability haste, and of course it's nice with the movement speed and the AP. But this is only if you're doing a Night Harvester build, and we're gonna get to that in the build section. Next we have Void Staff. Okay, it's really good item. It's A tier because it's just a really solid item. You won't buy it every game, but it's very very good against MR. It's very cheap this season. Lost 100 gold, only lost 5 AP. So that's pretty good. Yeah, good item if they have MR. Moving on, we have Sonya's Hourglass. Now this got a really huge buff, by the way. It lost, the price was reduced by 400 gold. It only lost 10 AP, and technically some cooldown because 10 ability haste is not the same as 10 CDR, but the stasis is the same, and so this item has across the board gotten a really big buff. It also builds from Seeker's Amgad, which is really nutty item right now. And so I think this is definitely viable if you're sitting on Seekers. Again, I'm personally not the biggest fan of Sonya's Hourglass, but it really depends on the game if you need it or not. And so if you sit on the Seekers, and you need the active, you can upgrade it no problem. If you need the Sonyas, it's very cheap. You can buy it no problem. So yeah, definitely a good item and a good option for the coming season, mainly because of the price. And what's even better here is the Banshee's Veil. The price was also, I think it was 3,000 before, or 2,900. So it lost a lot of gold in terms of price, and that's really good. Gives you 65 AP, which is pretty great. 45 MR, 10 ability haste, and the shield. Builds out of the Verdant Barrier, so an absolutely amazing item if you're up against people with like uh, abilities like Ash Alt or abilities you need to dodge like hooks. Very good item, and also pretty efficient stat-wise on Galio. You get a lot of damage and tankiness from the magic resist and the AP, and so I will definitely be buying this item more often, and I will prioritize it usually over Sonya's Hourglass, unless Sonya's is needed, because this one technically gives more damage and tankiness. And I don't like being in Sonya's stasis very often. Now moving on to Lichbane, and Lichbane is really it's getting kind of a buff this season. I believe it lost, like the price was reduced by 200, which is always great. It loses the CDR and the mana, but those we didn't really care about those items or those stats. And then it gets a buff to the Sheen effect, and it gets 10% extra AP on the Spellblade scaling, which is actually pretty huge. And I think because a lot of items this season give less AP than they used to, I think this item can be really fucking great because it's pretty solid. It gives a lot of AP, and also the 60% AP added to your combo is really good. And I think you can flex this with Void Staff. So if they're tanky, you can go Void Staff. Like if they have MR, and if they don't have MR, you can go Lichbane, and you can like smash squishies to Oblivion. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good item this season, and I look forward to testing it as it hits live. Um, yeah. Moving on to S tier, Magi Soulstealer. And this is no surprise for anyone who's watched my gameplay. I love this item. It lost the mana but gained health instead, which is great for Galio. It also got a 200 gold increase in price, but I think this is balanced because with how good Dark Seal is in the current iteration, there has to be some form of risk to buying Magi's here, and upping the cost with 200 seems pretty fair. It's still a great item, but it definitely you invest more gold into it, and also there might be games where you don't want to sort of upgrade your Dark Seal because it's just not worth it. Because you lose more stacks on death, and getting like, yeah, sure you can get like 15 extra stacks, which is about uh, 75 AP extra, but 75 AP extra for what's the upgrade price? It's like 1250 gold, I think. Is my math right? Yes, it's right. And so that's, it's kind of just a little bit better than a needless. Of course, you get the movement speed as well, but it really depends on the game whether you want to upgrade it or not. So it might be rare, but I think it's still a great item once you get it. Um, Obviously, the item is amazing. And yeah, of course, if Dark Seal gets nerfed heavily, then yeah, we will go Medjays more often. But still a great item, and still great if you're snowballing. Just maybe sometimes you'll hold on to your Dark Seal for maybe 10 minutes extra before committing to Medjays. And we have a new item called Horizon Focus, also in S tier. This item is really great. It's 3000 gold, gives you 100 AP, which is pretty decent compared to the other items in the set. And then we have the passive Hyper Shot, which when you immobilize someone, you increase their damage taken from yourself only by 10%. And basically, most of Galio's abilities have some form of immobilize. This item is pretty great. 10% extra damage is great, and it helps sort of cover, sort of give you a lot more damage where in the past you would have Spellbinder which gave more AP, but this one gives more percentage damage increase here. And so I think this is a worthy second item to succeed Spellbinder, because now we will go, for example, Rocket Belt into Horizon Focus. Yeah, and not much to say about it. Great item. Uh, and then of course we have Death Cap, and Death Cap is it's been nerfed quite a bit. The price was increased by 200, and the total ability power increase went from 40% to 30%. So they're definitely trying to limit how much AP mages have this season. Of course, these numbers may change. Again, this is just PBE numbers from when I'm making this video. But I think that it's still a core items. I still want to go for this item as like third or fourth item pretty much every game because of how well Galio scales with AP. So yeah, nothing really changed there. Just an overall nerf to the heavy AP playstyle, but it's nothing that we can't overcome with the new amazing mythic items. And moving on, we're gonna look at the builds, and I'm gonna start with the standard build number one here, and it's pretty straightforward. So for starting items, of course, we prioritize Dark Seal as it stands right now. Then we're gonna move in, and I think it's actually worth it to do a first item rocket belt. I just think this item is really fucking good. Uh, it doesn't make sense to me to rush Horizon Focus because it's just AP. Um, so I think that rocket belt is definitely the first item to go for, and you want to complete boots at some point. Then you want to go for Horizon Focus, and then you want to complete the Rabadons, and then you can situationally buy something like Void Stab or Lichbane, depending on if they have MR or not. And you can then finish up with a defensive item, and that defensive item can be maybe from a component that you already have, like if you bought Seeker's God in the early game. And of course, you can add the Oblivion Orb and Relanonomicon to the build as well, if you need it, and maybe replace it with one of the final item choices. Of course, there's the option for going Medjace as well. Remember your sweeper, remember your control walls, and yeah. Below there's like a kind of what it would look like um, more or less in the late game. And the item choices you can sort of fiddle around with, but you're going to end up with about 600 AP and having a lot of magic pen and actually being a really really strong uh, nuking champion. And so we're going to look at the next build. And I want to say first that build number one here is the standard build. So this means I'm going to build this most games. Build number two is versus high mobility. And I mentioned this before. It's basically the same build, but you just swap protocol with Everfrost. As you can see, you actually have only 100 HP less. And you also have almost, I think you have about 80 AP extra from this build. And then you get the active, which is very devastating in team fight and can sort of lock down high mobility champions. It's very disruptive, and I think it's viable in versus some team comps. I just generally think that Protobelt is the superior choice, but if you're in a team comp versus team comp where you won't be able to run them down with Protobelt because of some form of disengage or whatever, then this ability might actually be what you need because instead of going to them, you're going to make sure they stay at your place. And as always, you can flex some of the later items on whatever you need. And remember your sweeper and your pink wards. And now we're going to look at the third build that I think will be viable on Galio, and this is the map presence um, slash ability haste build. And so basically we do Night Harvester into Cosmic Drive. That's going to give us a lot of ability haste, and it allows our ultimate to be on a very low cooldown and makes us pretty fast in fights. Still gives us some damage, not as much as the other builds, but still some. And we transition this into more ability haste, and then we complete the death cap and some more AP. And I think again this build is very flexible, and you would usually play this if you know you're not going to be the main carry. Maybe you take TP and you just run around with this and just ult every single fight, and you'll be very strong to peel your teammates in skirmishes. And yeah, generally I'm not sure how viable it will be, but I think this item combination is definitely something to think about because if you look at the picture below, I have 85 ability haste, and this is without the Transcendence Mastery. If I go Transcendence, I will have almost 100, which is the same as 50% cooldown reduction. Now, 50% cooldown reduction is it's a little bit nutty. That means your ult is about uh, 80-second cooldown, which is absolutely nuts in the late game. You can just constantly ult every fight, and yeah. So maybe this is going to be viable, maybe not. But I would definitely test this and keep this in mind if you have a game where you know that you have to be all around the map and you are not going to be the main carry. Then this build might actually be pretty good. And so for the final thoughts, the cost and numbers on these items are still subject to change. Sometimes they even change how some of the abilities, some of the items function. And so what I'm saying in this video might be completely wrong once preseason hits and once preseason testing has been done for a few months. It might not apply for season 11. And so I'm going to try and sort of update in the comments with sort of changes as they happen. Um, but hopefully this should stay relatively consistent since we're very close to the new preseason patch. The other thing is that Galio's performance will depend on the meta. So a lot of people have predicted that the meta will be swarmed with AD assassins because their mythic items and items in general are just fucking nuts. Uh, and if that's the case, Galio might have to itemize a bit differently. Seekers will make it so that he's a really good pick, and you can still run Aftershock into these champions. So I still think Galio will be pretty good in this meta, but um, item choices and his performance in general will depend on how the meta forms in the new season. And if you have any questions about the items, anything I missed, or anything you've thought you want a deeper explanation of, you can leave some comments below. And other than that, I will say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys interacting with the channel and playing Galio in your own games, of course. So, until next time, have a good time. What?